Hello, everyone, and welcome along to today's session on empathetic leadership for people. We're just going to wait to let everyone in. We've got quite a few people attending today, so we'll just give it a couple of seconds before we get going. Welcome, everyone that's joining. We haven't quite started yet. We are just waiting for everyone to come along. We've got quite a lot of people signed up today. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. You may have noticed the chat functions already brilliant, already started off. That'll be quite active throughout the session. Feel free to interact. Just give it a moment longer. Wait for a few more people to come in. Like I said, we've got quite a few people coming today before we get started. Wonderful. Okay, let's just get started with a bit of an intro before I hand you over to Leanne. So my name is Tom Weaver. I'm from Beam Development and Training, and shortly you'll be hearing from Leanne Weaver. She'll be delivering our session today on empathetic leadership for people. But before we do, there's a few things that it's always important to cover. If you're watching this on replay, then you might not have access to all of the chat. So, or any of the chat, so that's fine. What we'll do is all of the resources that we put into the chat, we will be, they'll be in the people membership area, which we'll tell you how to get to later, but they will also be emailed to everyone who has registered. So at Beam, we support organizations all around the world. We have workshops. We have over 50 workshops that we've written. Many are CPD accredited. We also have therapeutic coaching programs. We will be putting the brochures for all of those in the chat as well. But we are on a mission to support people who are people just like you, people that manage other people. And we're building a community around these lunch and learns to support people with well-being tools and sessions that actually help. Like I mentioned before, we're creating a people platform, and in there you'll be able to have access to all of these lunch and learn sessions that we've done. So there'll be all the recorded sessions with all the resources and everything that we put in the chat to take away. We also have a special area that we are creating right now, but I can tell you about it today because it is a festive offer. So we have a festive reset. This is an hour workshop specifically for companies to help with de-stressing over the festive period. We only have capacity for another 2 companies. It's been quite popular this year, and that offer is at 250 plus VAT if you're in the UK. So that's in pounds sterling. Our next sessions are on the 10th of December. That's emotional intelligence, and the first session of the new year is the 15th of January for positive habits for people. We will be putting the links for all of those in the chats as well. So that is just about it from me. So I'm passing over to Leanne, who will be guiding you through today's session.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our 3rd free webinar for people. If you want to play a really weird drinking game / bingo game, then the word we're looking for is people, because we will say that a lot throughout this session. So this session is all about empathetic leadership, and it's something that we, as with all of the other free webinars we're delivering, we're looking at it from an angle of the people who are supporting other people. That's what we mean when we talk about people. If you haven't seen our previous sessions, we've done well-being and emotional resilience for people. They're all available through our platform, and you can have a little look at those at your leisure. If you can't find them, drop Tom or I a message and we will lead you to them. So today we've got a fair bit to cover in our brief time together. I promise we will finish on time so you can go and grab a sandwich and some lunch. We are going to talk about what I mean when I say empathetic leadership. What is that, and why should we care about that? And then we'll be talking about the difference between empathy and sympathy, which is something that gets brought up so often. I do a lot of training on emotional intelligence, and empathy is a key component of that. And so often people will, when I ask them what empathy is, they will essentially describe sympathy. And there's some really key differences between the two that I think it's really important we know about if we're trying to support other people. I'll also talk about what I call the double-edged sword of empathy. That, as with everything good, there's a kind of difficult side to it as well. Throughout our previous sessions, I've talked about things like compassion fatigue and the well-being paradox. The double-edged sword of empathy definitely sits under that umbrella as well. And then I'm going to really finish up with some practical tools that will help you be empathetic without costing your own well-being, sanity, peace of mind. So talking about the importance of empathy and self-care. So let's get straight into it. If there are any questions as we go through, you are welcome to pop questions into the chat box. There will be resources given to you at the end. So there's a few exercises in here that I will detail, but you can go off and do them yourselves with the resources that I've created. So hopefully you don't need to scribble too much information. So what is empathetic leadership? If you've ever come across someone called Simon Sinek, so created some amazing content and books, he talks about leadership being something about much more about taking care of the people that we're leading rather than taking charge of the people. And I think sometimes we get that a bit confused. Sometimes we see being a leader as just kind of leading the way and making people follow us, which definitely has its place. But true leadership is actually caring about those people who follow us. So when I talk about empathetic leadership, what I'm really talking about is being able to understand your team, being able to understand the people around you, knowing that they've got their own needs, issues, beliefs, and leading them through a professional environment. And that would involve not just listening to their concerns or their challenges, but also acknowledging their emotional needs within that and responding thoughtfully. Essentially, an empathetic leader doesn't just go in and try and solve and fix everything. And I know sometimes we can all fall into that trap. But an empathetic leader is much more likely to create an environment where people feel seen, valued, understood, and where they're empowered to help and fix their own situation. That's what empathetic leadership is all about. If you're an empathetic leader, you are very likely to foster a very positive, inclusive, emotionally healthy environment. And that will invariably improve team morale, it will improve productivity, and ultimately improve organizational success. Now, quite often when we're trying to describe a concept, sometimes it's useful to look at what it's not rather than what it is. So I want you to just spend a moment reflecting on some of your past managers, and it will probably be easier for you to recall a manager that you have had in the past that wasn't necessarily empathetic, a manager that you felt didn't really care about you as a human being, saw you perhaps as just fulfilling the role you were there for. And you will be able to recognize quite quickly how demotivated that made you feel, how team morale was probably lacking, and how you didn't feel that you were being recognized and rewarded as a full, complete human being. So what we want when we're looking at empathetic leadership is really the opposite of that. So there are some core components to being an empathetic leader that I think are worth touching upon. The first is being a really good active listener. Now, so many people think they're a great listener and actually probably aren't. Research suggests that unfortunately, most of us listen to someone with the intent of replying. If you ever had that situation, you bump into someone and you say, "How was your weekend?" And they start telling you about a lovely meal that they went for. And as they're telling you about this meal, in your head, you're already thinking, "Ooh, I went for a lovely meal. I've been to that restaurant." And you're constructing your reply and your response whilst they're still talking. That's what I mean when I say, unfortunately, most of us listen with the intent of replying. You've probably had that situation when talking to a friend or a colleague where you're really trying to convey something that really matters to you, and you feel like they're just not getting it. They flip the conversation and make it about themselves, or they just go off on another tangent. And what that makes us feel is that we're being unheard. An empathetic leader is great at listening, truly listening. They'll listen with intent, with focus, and they'll also be great at nonverbal communication. So we know from research that how we communicate is about 7% of our overall communication. So the words that we use are only a tiny part of the story when we communicate. What really matters is our nonverbal communication. So our tone. So I could say, "Good morning, good morning, morning." It's the same word, but the tone has a very different meaning. And then our body language. So that those non-verbal cues, perhaps someone is saying that they're fine, but actually their body language is saying something completely different. Perhaps somebody is saying that they're managing, but their body language is saying that they're struggling. An empathetic listener will be really good at picking up on those non-verbal cues, and that helps them understand individuals much better and offer the appropriate support. Another tool of the empathetic listener is one we're going to learn much more in detail about if you come to the session on the 10th of December, but it's emotional intelligence. Now, empathy is a core component of emotional intelligence. If we look at Daniel Goleman, who was the first person to come up with emotional intelligence, his model had 5 core components of emotional intelligence, and one of those was empathy. Empathetic leaders are emotionally intelligent because they experience empathy. And that means that they can not only recognize the emotion in others through that communication, through the non-verbal communication, but they also know their own emotions and they're able to use that to navigate interpersonal relationships. So they will know when it's appropriate to perhaps bring some of their emotion in and when it's appropriate to keep that in the background. An emotionally intelligent leader is much more likely to display compassion and allow the person that's sharing with them the opportunity to respond to their challenge. How would you like to solve it? To empower them, to give them the tools and support they need to be able to resolve the challenge themselves. And then the third one is an empathetic leader takes supportive action. So they don't just sit there and listen. I mean, all of us sometimes want to be just heard. But often, if we go into a leader to talk about a challenge we've got, we also want them to take action to show that they care about us. So, an empathetic leader will make a decision that reflects on their understanding of their team members' needs. They will build trust and commitment by following through and doing what they say they will do. It's really interesting when I talk about confidence, I always talk about trust. You cannot have confidence in someone without trust in them. And there are 2 amazing coaches in America called Posner and Kouzes. And they looked at leaders all around the world in exceptional circumstances. So they looked at military leaders, they looked at sports teams that were top of the league, they looked at leaders of organizations that were thriving and incredibly successful. And they looked at what made a good leader. And what they found was what made a good leader was one thing, and that was trust. That the people following that leader trusted that they would do what they said they would do. And Kouzes and Posner came up with this wonderful acronym that I use so often when I talk about confidence. And I convince people that it's a Welsh word because the acronym, and Tom, if you can type it in the chat box, the acronym is DWYSOID. Do what you say you will do. That's trust in a nutshell. If you need to follow a leader, you need to know that that person will do what they say they will do. That you don't just go and talk to them and tell them your problems and they say they're there and then you go away and you're forgotten about. That you are able to tell them your problems, and if they say they're going to do something about it, that they will follow through on that. If you want to build trust in yourself, you also need to do what you say you will do with yourself. This is supportive action, doing what we say we will do. The key with being a successful empathetic leader in this circumstance, though, is that they can do this whilst also maintaining their own boundaries. So they're able to support their team, but they also have their own boundaries to prevent emotional overload. And we're going to explore that in a bit more detail later on. So why does it matter? Why does empathy matter in leadership? In some environments, this is still seen as quite a soft skill, but it is so much more than a soft skill. It's a strategic advantage that will enhance the performance of both employee and organization. There are lots of studies that show the benefits of being an empathetic leader, and I'm going to explore this a little bit more for you here. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Tom. So one of the main benefits of having an empathetic organization is employee engagement and retention. So there are multiple research studies that show when an employee feels that they are being listened to, heard, understood, when they are valued, then they are much more likely to, one, stay in that organization. So a recent study from the Workplace Empathy Report in 2023 found that 85% of employees say they will be likely to stay with an employer who demonstrates empathy, 85%. And also CIPD study found that empathy-driven leadership significantly reduces employee turnover. So they found that 70% of UK employees said that they would leave their current role if they felt their leader wasn't empathetic to their challenges and struggles. These aren't insignificant figures. These are huge figures that have a massive impact on employee engagement and retention. We also know in the world that we're living in now, particularly post-pandemic, that the mental health of individuals is at an all-time crisis level. The Mental Health Foundation UK found that nearly 60% of people said they have experienced a mental health challenge during 2022. 60%. So leaders who can exhibit empathy to that, identify those struggles early on, offer the appropriate support and signposting. You don't have to be able to fix everyone, but that you can signpost and support them. Then you can prevent burnout, absenteeism, or a mental health crisis. So we can be preventative in our support by being more empathetic. Also really useful for DEI. If you are an organization, and we all should be, focusing on your diversity, equality and inclusion, empathy is crucial because we need to recognize that some people from more diverse backgrounds and perspectives, that might provide challenges that we have never encountered. And we need to recognize that those conversations need to happen and make it easier for people to foster a sense of belonging. And finally, more of a bottom line statistic, but certainly not one to be ignored, is according to a 2023 report, in an empathetic environment, when employees feel that they have an empathetic leader, they showed a 12% increase in productivity. So we know that empathy fosters more honest communication, more open communication, trust, and it will reduce conflict and misunderstanding. We have that sense of belonging within our organization and working towards some mutual goals. I'm going to pop that in there because there we go. So I mentioned at the beginning that quite often when I talk about empathy, people confuse empathy and sympathy. They get them mixed up a little bit. So if I just get you to sit and think on your own right now, what is the difference between empathy and sympathy? For some of you, it might be a little bit difficult to describe. Quite commonly, we use the words synonymously, but they're not. And the best way I've ever heard it described is with this little analogy. Now, I'm not very good at creating images on ChatGPT, but I created this one and I recognize that it looks like the man in the hole is hovering, but let's just pretend he's not hovering, okay? He hasn't got the power of levitation, that he is sat in a hole. So imagine you were walking down the street and there was a great big hole in the street, and you looked in and there was someone sat at the bottom of the hole. If you were displaying sympathy, you would look at that person and say, oh no, you're stuck in a hole. Thank you, Caris. Oh no, they're stuck in a hole. What are we going to do? And you would recognize that it's a horrible place for them to be. So you decide to help them. You jump in the hole with them. Now, in the beginning, that might be quite nice for the person stuck in the hole because the person stuck in the hole now has a bit of company. But this is where sympathy isn't necessarily very proactive or helpful in the long run. Because after a while, all we've got now is two people stuck in the hole. Or quite often, actually, what happens is we display sympathy to someone, they stand on us and they get out of the hole and we stay stuck in the hole feeling awful. Have you ever had that situation? Someone's come to you in a work or a personal setting and they've offloaded a challenge that they've got, and you've listened and you've cared and you've supported, and they go away feeling brilliant and you're left there feeling absolutely awful. That's because you've displayed sympathy, not empathy. If you think about it, when we suffer a bereavement, we send sympathy cards because in that moment, we are feeling the loss with the person who's suffered the greatest loss. So we are in sympathy, we feel it. But if we stay in sympathy for that person, we end up keeping them trapped and unhappy and grieving rather than being constructive and helpful. Now, let's imagine we're walking down that road, we see that hole, we see the person in the hole again, and then we look at them and we go, oh no, that's awful, you're stuck in a hole. What empathy does is it says, now how do we get you out? So this little man sat at the top here is trying to problem solve with the man who can levitate and help him get out of the hole. This is the difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy is saying, I recognize that this is hard for you. What do you need from me to support you and help you through it? Way more productive, way more proactive, way more helpful. And many of us get these lines blurred. And so many people I speak to, particularly in a HR context, describe themselves in a way that I always sum up as an emotional sponge. That everyone tells them all their problems, they absorb it all, everyone else goes away feeling better, and they feel absolutely drained by the end of the day. It's because they've sympathized, not empathized. So when I empathize, I actually need to hold my ground and not get in the hole with the person because I'm of much more use. As well as doing this training, I'm also a therapist. And in the therapy room, it's crucial I empathize because otherwise, when people are telling me the challenges they're going through, I would probably end up crying. Not a great look for a therapist. So I have to recognize that I can be more help and support if I step back, and then I can see the clear picture, and then I can empathize and give them the help that they need. Really important that we take that away from the session today. One of the challenges that we see when people are being empathetic or in empathy-based roles is that quite often they're dipping in and out of empathy and sympathy, and they feel drained. So a study in 2021 found that people in HR were 45% more stressed, significantly because of the emotional strain of supporting other people. This is why we've created People People. We know the challenge. We know how difficult it is always being that person who supports everyone else. So whilst we can see that empathy is a powerful tool, it's one that we need to work with carefully to make sure we are protecting ourselves as well. So the double-edged sword of empathy is ensuring that I'm helping other people, but not draining myself in the process. We've talked in previous sessions about something called compassion fatigue, a form of emotional exhaustion that can result in us feeling burnt out, in us getting stressed, in us becoming unwell and taking time off work because of our constant exposure to the challenges of other people. So we need to make sure we manage our empathy in a healthy way that helps us be caring and supportive and get all of those wonderful benefits of being an empathetic leader, whilst importantly protecting ourselves first. And one of the things I talk about when I'm working, particularly with managers and leaders, is when I'm teaching you the stuff that I'm teaching you, which is all therapy based, it's all from psychology, neuroscience, neuropsychology. When I'm teaching that stuff, first and foremost, be selfish with it. Think about how can this help me before you dive into thinking about how it can help everyone else. And then you can make sure you're protecting your own well-being first. One of the greatest challenges we have in any caring profession, and certainly as a therapist, I know this, is we desperately want to help and support everyone else. That's why we're in the role. But unfortunately, if we're not careful, we do that at the expense of our own well-being. And that's just not a good look. I speak to people all the time who ask me how I manage to protect my well-being in the environment that I'm in. And my answer is always the same. It's really not a good look if a therapist and a well-being trainer turns up looking stressed and exhausted. So I have to manage mine. Otherwise, what I'm delivering, the whole essence of it, will be really inauthentic. Because what we know is when we suffer from things like compassion fatigue, is our own mental health can decline. We can experience empathy-related stress. So a rise in depression, anxiety, apathy as well. And we can experience a reduced job satisfaction too. So what I want to do to finish up this session is to give you 3 practical, clear tools that will enable you to start to look after yourself whilst also being an empathetic leader. So all of these have quite a nice amount of research behind them. And all of these are things that I would encourage you to do, whether we were in a massive group setting or whether we were working on a one-to-one basis. So let's start with boundaries. So boundaries are something that all of us need. Most people who step in my therapy room are poor with boundaries because we've got to that stage where we need extra support and help. If we do not have boundaries, then we start to struggle with our own well-being, with our mental health, our physical health, and we start to struggle with the relationships around us. Brené Brown is the world's leading expert on boundaries, and she defines boundaries as how we communicate to others what is and is not okay. The problem most of us have is we make a big assumption that other people should know what's okay. Other people should know how to treat me. All of us have probably been taught whilst we were children about the golden rule. We should all treat others how we wish to be treated. It's wonderful in theory, but in practice, so many people don't do that. And so if I don't communicate my boundaries, somebody else with the best will in the world will not necessarily know that they're overstepping them. Now, boundaries exist in so many ways, but there's a couple of key ways I want to share with you that are really important when we're talking about being a leader. So one is our time boundary. Particularly if we're in a HR role, we're often at the beck and call of other people. And so our time isn't seen as precious and valuable because there's an emergency, there's a crisis, and we need to be responsive to that. Leaders often feel that they need to be available at all times, but that constant availability can lead to emotional exhaustion. What time boundaries do is they allow us to dedicate specific time and support. And I would suggest that you make specific time for your own personal well-being and recovery rather than specific time when other people can come to you. So carving out a specific time, such as I'm happy to have one-to-one conversations, but that's always between 10 and 4. First thing in the morning and last thing of the day are reserved for my admin, my personal reflection, my strategic work. And so you have a big window of time where people can reach out to you, but you're really protecting the the bookend versions of your day. We've then got emotional boundaries, which we're touching upon when we're talking about sympathy. Emotional boundaries help us manage how much of our own emotional energy we invest into problems. The problem with being a caring person is sometimes, and I hold my hands up to this as well, we can care too much and we become over invested in something and it starts to drain us. So what we need to do is to be very careful that we're not absorbing everyone else's stress and struggles. And for me, the way I do that, sort of how I was describing with being in the hole, is I remind myself constantly that I will be much more helpful if I take a step back than if I take a step forward. So far, in my experience of helping other people, there has never been a time where me stepping forward has meant I've been really proactive and helpful. But when I take a step back, I see things clearly. I can be more strategic. I can problem solve. I can give the person space to come up with their own solutions as well. Aha, we're going to talk about digital boundaries as well in a moment, Hannah. I'll come back to that. Physical boundaries is something that not everyone thinks about, but this is really important. So if you are back in the office, what kind of setup do you have for your office when people come in? So if you came into my therapy office, what you would notice is that the chair that the client sits in and the chair that I sit in are actually quite far apart. And that's really deliberate. So giving physical space between you and that person enables you to be able to have that distance of empathy and to be more productive and proactive. If we are sat right next to the person, we almost start to absorb their challenges. So we're back into that sympathy thing. We're back into the whole. Physical boundaries are, of course, important in protecting our own physical well-being. We absolutely, none of us like it when someone's standing too close to us and it can make us feel very unsafe and unsettled. But think about how you have set up your room for someone to talk to you if someone's coming in physically. Have you got them too close to you? Have you got that environment in a way that presents you as the problem solver? In old-fashioned offices, I don't think we have this anymore, but in old-fashioned offices, traditionally, the boss's chair was always bigger and sat higher, and the visitor's chair was always lowered, so you were at a different level. Maybe good with old-fashioned leadership, saying that I'm more important than you. But when we're creating empathy, really not good. We don't want to give that message. I'm more important than you. I'm better than you. I'm bigger than you. So think about that physical space and make sure you are giving yourself appropriate physical space. Digital boundaries. So digital boundaries, and I think what Hannah is setting, kind of touching upon here, also involves a lot of discipline, a lot of self-discipline. So digital boundaries, the way I see it, come in two ways. External digital. So how am I going to allow people to contact me? Am I going to allow my team to be able to WhatsApp me morning, noon, and night? Am I going to answer emails at 11 in the evening? That's external, and that's on me to be able to manage that and just have a cutoff. I do not respond to emails after this time. I do not have my phone on loud after this time. I do not look at my phone after this time. So that's discipline. And then internal boundaries of actually, what about my use of my phone? It's probably the greatest time drain on all of us. And we are all like Pavlov's dogs in that we're conditioned to just pick up our phone in these moments of downtime and mindlessly start scrolling. I cannot tell you the number of times that I've wanted to pick up my phone because I'm going to quickly send a message. And before I know it, I'm scrolling Instagram or Facebook pointlessly. And most of us have this almost Pavlovian response of just wasting time, allowing all of that information to come into my brain that isn't filtered. It's just instantly giving me this information. And that can be draining. So a digital boundary is recognizing I need to set up some parameters to stop that. There are some great apps. I know certainly on an iPhone, it'll tell you how often you've used your phone that day, that week. You can use that. I think eventually it becomes white noise. There's a wonderful app. And again, Tom, I don't know if you can find it and pop it in the chat box, but it's called something like Forest. And the longer you go without touching your phone, the more it grows a forest. And they've almost gamified not touching your phone. I thought it was, yeah. So things like that might be a good tool to help you put those boundaries in place. And then the last one is delegation boundaries. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy in that we just say, oh, I'll do it. I'll do everything. We sometimes absorb too much emotional labor when actually we could delegate some tasks. There are people around us who could potentially take on some of that. And I want to, yes, I mean this in a practical way in terms of the workload that you're carrying, but I want to bring this back to this idea of empathetic leadership. I mentioned earlier that many of us unfortunately slip into someone's bringing me a problem, so I feel I need to fix it. And so we take on their problem in the hope of resolving it and making it better, and everything goes away. It's always with really good intentions, but actually it is not helpful. We need to delegate tasks back to the person who has brought us the problem, unless there's something that they're not able to fix. Perhaps it is within our responsibility and role. The reason this is so important is because it creates self-reliance and self-empowerment. So if I bring this back to the therapy room again, so often in the therapy room, someone will be sat opposite me and they'll be exasperated and they will say to me, Leanne, just tell me what to do. Just tell me the right answer. And I will always say, I'm really sorry, but I can't, because only you know what's right for you. Only you know what's the right answer for you. Now, sometimes it is quite clear what they should do. But if I just jump in and do that for them and say, okay, do X, Y, and Z and everything will be okay, then what happens is it creates a dependency on me. So the next time they have a challenge, they're coming back to me. If, however, I talk around with them and I get them to work out, oh, well, potentially I could do option X and option Y, what I start to create is self-reliance, a boost in self-confidence, and selfishly, it frees up my time because they're not depending on me. This is a really important tool in leadership. So many of us get our worth from being wanted and needed, but actually it will free us up to do more and be more impactful if we empower other people to take on their responsibility themselves. The next tool I want to share with you is to encourage you to take what I call empathy breaks. So empathy breaks are a brief 5-minute break that just gives you the opportunity to step away after something has been emotionally or mentally challenging. And there's lots of evidence supporting the benefit of an empathy break. So what lots of us will do is someone will come to us, they'll tell us something heavy, we'll be engrossed in trying to help with that. They go away and then we go straight back into emails or whatever the challenge. Now we know through research that when we do that, our cortisol levels stay pretty high. So we're not actually engaging in the best way. An empathy break is rooted in evidence that show that a short break after an emotionally draining task can help restore our energy, our mental clarity, and enhance our resilience. So there's lots of benefits for it. And the concept is that you deliberately take a break that gives you an opportunity to come back refreshed. So there are lots of different ones, 5 minutes minimum. There's a lovely one that's called the 555 Empathy Reset. And again, there'll be resources to support this. So don't worry if you don't take it all away right now. But the 555 Empathy Reset is after an emotionally intense conversation, you commit to stepping away for 5 minutes to literally physically and emotionally distance yourself from the content of that interaction. So ideally, if you can, go outside, go to another room. Then you take 5 slow, deep breaths to help center you and release the physiological effects of stress. So all of that stress that's been building up. Focusing on your breathing will calm your nervous system and regulate you. And then take a further 5 minutes to reframe the conversation. So 5 minute break, 5 breaths, 5 minute reframe. In the reframe, you focus on what you can control. Okay, what do I need to do in this? You perhaps reflect on this is heavy. Perhaps you reflect on maybe I need support with this. Maybe I need some signposting. Consciously let go of anything you can't control. So consciously remind yourself that, okay, this isn't for me to fix. This isn't for me to solve. And then go back to your day. Excuse me. By incorporating this bit of recovery time, you will be able to manage emotional overload much easier. Okay, that cough was never going to go. The final tool that I want to teach you is based upon something that many of you may have come across before if you've read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And Covey talks about the circle of concern and the circle of influence. It's been slightly built upon now to include an extra circle, which is the circle of control. Essentially, what Covey talks about is the fact that any problem, worry, can fall into one of 3 categories. It's something I can control, it's something I can influence, or it's something that can only be a concern because I can't control or influence it. If someone comes to you with a challenge, let's say they're going through a very difficult time at home and they're really struggling, you can control maybe altering their working pattern to take some pressure off them. So you have control on that. You can maybe influence suggesting that they contact a EAP or a therapist or whatever support your company advises. You can influence it, but you can't force them to do that. And then you can be concerned of, I hope that problem they're dealing with at home will resolve quickly, but I can't fix it. I can't solve that. When we take on the problems of everyone else, we tend to work in this circle from the outside in. So I absorb the world's concerns, I try and influence a few people, and I end up controlling very little. When we work from the circle inside out, so I focus on what I can control, then what I can influence, and then what concerns me I'm aware of, but I'm not trying to solve it, I start to feel empowered. So it's a great little tool to use. Okay, we're coming to time, so I want to just wrap up really quickly. We've talked a lot about empathy and what that means. So we know that being an empathetic leader is a key tool for being successful, but it can be really draining if we don't manage it. We've got a couple of really good tools there, creating boundaries, taking empathy breaks, and focusing on what you can control. And of course, all of that information will be in the chat box, and Tom will also email that out to you. As a summary, today's video and any resources will also come out to you as an email. If ever you want to come to these workshops, but you know you can't make it live, you can still register for them. Everyone who's registered still gets the video and the resources. You can also register on our website, Beam Training /people and create a free account, and you can access all of the content that we have. You can schedule a call with us if you are dealing with anything personally or professionally that you need some private help with. And our next People workshop is on emotional intelligence on the 10th of December. And if you need more help and support, we offer a whole range of things, and you are more than welcome to reach out to us. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. I hope it's given you a lot to think about, and I hope to see you again on our next session in December. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Leanne. And all of those links and all of those resources are available in the chat. You'll be able to download everything. And even if you forget to, and you're watching this, or if you're watching this on replay, they'll be emailed out, or you'll be able to access them in the People membership area. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. We look forward to seeing you on the 10th of December, or if you can't make that, in the first thing of next year. Have a great week. Bye.
Thank you.